when he goes to speak somewhere, he says to his audience, I understand that I'm here to speak to you, and you are here to listen to me. If you finish before me, please raise your hand. So I would not mind really at all. I would even like it if you would interrupt me and ask me questions as we go on, because 2 hours and a half, is it 2 hours and a half, the lecture tonight? 2 hours. Eh? Well, it's quite short to speak about the North, because the North is quite a big place, as you know, and it occupies roughly 1/3 of Canada, and this is at the exclusion of the northern parts of the province. If you include the northern parts of the provinces, we can say easily that the North represents half of Canada. So we are really a northern country, as you can see, and we are the second largest one. The first one being, of course, Russia. Russia has more territory around the pole than we have, of course, quite more than we have, but we are the second one. If you take the United States, for instance, well, they have only that small piece here, Alaska, while Canada has quite a big piece of territory beyond the 60th parallel. Normally, this is the boundary that is considered to put the division between the North and the South. The 60th boundary, because it is from this latitude that the Northwest Territories and the Yukon start. But we have an exception, of course, two exceptions. We have the province of Quebec, whose north starts below that, and which does not belong to the government of Canada. In the case of the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, they both belong to the government of Canada. I mean by this that they are not the owners of the resources. The government of Canada is the owner of the resources there. In the provinces, as you know, the provinces are the owners of the resources. These two regions, the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, are not run by a prime minister elected by the people. They are run by a civil servant appointed by Ottawa, who acts as a sort of prime minister for Yukon and prime minister for Northwest Territories. But both of them are just employees of the federal minister of Indian and Northern Affairs. They are advised by a board of elected people, by a council comprising elected people all over their territories, but these people have no power, really. They have just the power to advise. And the commissioner, the one who acts like a premier, the commissioner is not at their service. The commissioner is at the service of the federal government, the federal minister of Indian Affairs, and these people just advise. The commissioner is not obliged to obey or to bow to anything they request. So if you consider that the North is above the 60th parallel, you can see that there's only, outside of the Northwest Territories and the Yukon Territory, of just Quebec, which has a part of its territory in the north, beyond the 60th parallel. No other province has that, except Newfoundland, with that very small piece here, really, being in the north, above the 60th parallel. But of course, this is an artificial delimitation, and you are as much in the north if you are here along the Hudson's Bay, even if you are lower than that. But let's say along the Hudson's Bay, at the 55th parallel, you are as much in the north, in the real north, as you are when you are here at the 70th latitude. Even here, you have trees, while here at the 55th latitude, you have no trees. So it depends, of course, on the climate, the Gulf Stream, and all these things. But I mentioned this just to tell you that the boundaries of the North is rather an artificial line that is normally referred to, but has no real meaning except the political meaning. It means that above the 60th parallel, where the North starts, politically speaking, the government is quite different than in all the rest of Canada. Well, this is, of course, a very big piece of land, and as you probably know, it is not inhabited by very many people. So if we take the North, the Canadian North, and we put it like this, if we take the Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Quebec, and Labrador, then you have here Indians in the Yukon, about 3,500 of them. You have Métis people. You know what is a Métis? Eh? What is it? Half-breed, that's it. It's a mixture of an Indian with non-Indian. It's a product of the mixture. So you have apparently about 3,000 of them also. It's very difficult to know exactly, but this is what they claim. In the Northwest Territories, you have about 8,000 Indians. You have apparently as many Métis, but this is far from sure. There is no, I will explain to you why it is not sure. We don't know exactly the figures in the case of the Métis. And you have the Inuit, or the Eskimos. So in the Northwest Territories, you have about 14,500 Inuits. And in Quebec now, well, now it's difficult. I will not speak only about what exists above the 60th parallel, but about what exists in New Quebec. New Quebec is a term that has been introduced in the Canadian statutes in 1912. This will be an important date to memorize, at least for tonight. And so when we speak about the north of Quebec, the northern part of Quebec, normally we speak about the part that is called New Quebec, that has been named New Quebec in 1912, when this northern part of Quebec, which was part of the Rupert's Land, has been added to the Quebec territory in 1912, and it received the name New Quebec or Nouveau-Québec. So you have in Quebec, then I take all of New Quebec, you have the Indians. They are about 4,000 in New Quebec itself. This does not include all of James Bay. We will come back to that. So in New Quebec, we have 4,000 Indians, and we have about 4,000 Inuit, and the Métis have not organized yet. Nobody has mentioned them yet, and I will explain to you why also. In the Labrador, apparently, this is also difficult to state exactly, but apparently there would be about 3,000 Indians and 2,500 Inuit, and the Métis still is very difficult to know. So the first thing that we can see is that this is a very small population for that to inhabit about half of the, well, 1/3 of Canada. This is very small quantity of people, of course. But it is interesting to see that until a certain time in our history, nobody gave any attention to them. And there are many reasons for that. Really, our interest started where our lecture is supposed to start tonight. Really, it started in 1940. Though before that there were a certain interest manifested by the Southern Society towards the inhabitants of the North, the native people of the North. Well, just to say a few words about that, in the Yukon, at the turning of the century, in 1898, you know that the rush, what sort of a rush happened for the gold there, eh? The Klondike. You have heard about that, very probably. So the Klondike days, this opened the Yukon to the invasion of the North, of that part of the North, by the people living in the South. By South, of course, we mean just below the 60th parallel. So the people from South, from everywhere, in fact, from here, from Quebec, from New Brunswick, many people went to the Yukon in order to participate in the Klondike days. But this did not last very long, and as you know, there were some small cities built. The most famous is Dawson in the Yukon, and it has gone to a phantom city after the Klondike days were terminated. They lasted only about 6 or 7 years. And now they are rebuilding the decadent houses in order to attract the tourism in the Yukon. This has started last year, but this was a phantom city doing nothing, and all the people had quit, of course, because the gold rush was terminated. So it was a little incursions there at the turning of the century, and at that time it is interesting to see that there was a government of the Yukon established at that time. But after a while, it was no more necessary to have a government. So the Yukon lost its government, and the authority went back directly to Ottawa. It came back after the year, in the 20s. Again, the Yukon territory got a form of a government that has become more and more sophisticated in the recent years. But a form of government, in other words, there was one person designated to assume the responsibility of this territory, and he had advisors chosen by the minister in Ottawa at that time. The advisors were not elected, they were just chosen. So there was not much there, but there was a Klondike, and until the First World War, there was really nothing more. In the Northwest Territories, there was absolutely nothing, so to speak, until 1940, until the Second World War. And the Keewatin and the Mackenzie and the Franklin district they all constitute the Northwest Territories. So in the Northwest Territories, there was nothing before the Second World War. In Quebec, there was nothing, and in Labrador, there was nothing. When I say nothing, it is not completely true, though, because there were some explorers, there were some researchers. There were, of course, some navigators who went here and others who went there in the Beaufort Sea, and some people who tried to go through the islands. And of course, all these people, starting in the 15th century, in the 16th century, all these people came in touch with the native people, and some of them married some native people. Very few of them, but some of them married them. So some of the native people knew some of the white people before 1940, but the activities all through that area were quite limited. Now, with the Second World War, something very special happened. And what happened is that, as you can remember, or as you can have learned, those who are too young to remember, during the Second World War, there was an urgency for the United States and for Canada to build some bases, some airports, some airstrips that would permit the planes to stop and refuel, and others which would permit the planes in emergency to land down. So this was one of the reasons why the North suddenly became interesting, became a subject of preoccupation for our society. So I call this, if we look at the period since 1940, I will try to present you these periods according to function of the preoccupations or interests of the dominant society. The dominant society is us. The dominant society is the society that makes the rules. The society as compared to those people who are not at all taking part in the decisional process, in the policy making. They were completely outside, and they are still almost completely outside of the decision centers. So I think we have to determine, if we look only at them, there has not been very much change or very great changes all over the years. Only recently there have been some changes. But these changes have happened gradually because of the kind of preoccupations or interests that the dominant society had for the North. So I think the first one really was if we start from 1940, it was the military. The military preoccupation. First, at the time of the war, for the landing strips to be built, for that would represent alternatives for the plane going to Europe for the war. And second, after the Second World War, because of defense purposes, the Canadian society and the United States society, of course, thought that maybe the Russians could invade North America. And I know that those who are about my age will not smile at that, but maybe the young ones will smile at that, because it was rather ridiculous to believe that at that time. But anyway, we believe that. Our society believed that the Russians were interested to invade the United States through Canada. And of course, the best place for them to come from was from the Bering Strait here, and to invade here, or to come going to Greenland and coming to northern Canada. So suddenly the North, at the end of the Second World War, the North was considered as a place where we should put our advance posts for our defense. So it is why during that period you had two kinds of lines built. You had the Dew line and you had the Mid-Canada line. These were two radar lines, of which the purpose, the usefulness, was to depict in advance, was to warn if the enemy would come. I remember very well being in Great Whale along the Hudson's Bay in 1961, and just in order to check that, I asked my plane, the plane that I had, to go over the line, and the radar were functioning and everything, but nobody reported us. And after that, I asked the people how it was. So they said, well, we simply don't look at it because we know it's no more useful. And it was no more useful because there were new, as you know, new weapons developed, and eventually this military vision of the North was no more useful at the end of that period. And I would say that this period goes on to about 1955. So in about 1955, at least the Mid-Canada line was completely unuseful. Everybody knew that. And even the Dew line installations were believed to be unuseful. They were not closed down. However, there are still some bases of the Dew lines in the north. You have one in Tuktoyaktuk here, and you have some in Alaska, and you have others in the Northwest Territories. But it's just a question of time. I mean, it is not closed down because it would create a lot of problems in many places if it would suddenly close. But the activity is quite diminished as compared to what it was during this period of active military or preoccupations for the North. Is there any question about that? Yes?
May I ask you a question about the population figures?
Yes, sure.
Sorry to go back to that.
Yeah.
What is the date of them and the source? Is this from your own research?
Yeah, well, no, these are official figures or about, but when you have the official figures, it always date of about 2 years ago, But it's about that. It's very difficult to have it precisely. Maybe it would be the time to come. I will ask you more in detail. So this was the first period. We will go to the second period after that. I will give a word of explanation for that. You see, I told you, for instance, in the case of the Indians here, we can know exactly the figure. Mind you, it could be 3,467. And not that exactly, but this must be quite accurate according to, I take these figures from the organizations themselves. You see, the Indian, this is from the Yukon Native Brotherhood at Whitehorse, and this is from the Northwest Territories Indian Brotherhood. Though it's only recently that they have started to say that, because for the last 4 years they have always said 7,000. So one day I phoned them, and I said, you have just prepared another brief to the government, and you say 7,000. What happened with the newborn? You see, it has been the 4th year that you say 7,000. So now they have corrected their figures. But it is still very difficult. Why? Because of the definition of an Indian. Indian in Canada, what we call a status Indian or a true Indian, is the one whose name appears on the lists in Ottawa, on the Indian list in Ottawa, which is kept by the Minister of Indian Affairs. You have, and I know some of them, you have white people who are on this list, and so they are status Indian. I know a few of them. They are white kids who have been taken care of, have been adopted, so to speak, without being adopted legally, by Indian people. So their their name are on the status Indian list in Ottawa, so they are considered to be Indian. I know Indians, on the other hand, who are not on the list, and so they are not Indians. But there are not many of them. So you see, the only source where we can check the figures are the lists in Ottawa. But this can take a lot of time, see, because they have to register the newborns, it has to come from the nurses very far in the islands and everything. So it's very difficult to reconcile the figures which are given about them. In the case of Quebec, I know that because I know almost all of them by their names. So I'm pretty sure my figure is quite close to it. But in the case of the Eskimos, they are just considered to be as you and me. I mean, they are not on any list, you know. So it has taken something special at the demography department of the Department of Health in Quebec in order to put on the computer the right thing so that we could get the figures about how many Eskimos there were. But I'm not still sure that they do that. So you have to refer to those who are there, you know, and to their own associations and things like that. It's very difficult to find that in official places. Yeah?
Are they still, what we call the disc numbers, is that still in operation?
It is disappearing. I think it is still in operation in some places, yes.
And the Inuit in northern Quebec were also part of that system?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was because the federal government has always been there and is still there. Eh? So we will, when we speak about the political development, we will come back to that question. So the Métis, you see, it's more complicated. Here you see in the Yukon, they tell the association, they have a non-status Indian association. So this non-status Indian association, the Métis, they tell me that they are at least 3,000. But who can check that? Because they have not all that membership, but surely there are many people who are not members of their association and they are Métis. In the Northwest Territories, this figure looks very high, and I think the Indians do not accept that, but again, it is the association, the Métis Association of the Northwest Territories, which says we are more numerous than the Indians, the status Indian. So I say maybe at least they are equal. So all this is difficult, really, to define exactly. This figures is an adjustment of the census that I made myself, the census of 1969 or 70. So I made I projected from my knowledge about the rate of birth and the rate of death, and I come to about this for the Northwest Territories. Does it answer your question?
Yes.
You got another question? So now we have, so this was the first period. We have a second period, which starts in 1955 and would last, I would say, until about 1960 or 62. It's very difficult. You should see where here the military thing was finished. It was not finished. It still lasts. There are still some bases, military bases in the north. But what is important is that suddenly a new preoccupation starts a new period. And in 1955, what happened around that time, I think, is that a human concern suddenly developed for the people there. And this was a funny kind of a human concern, I think, in a way, but it was really a human concern. The fact that we had bases, military bases in the north, made us discover that there were some human beings around there. And at the same time, it made the journalists And the officials, ministers, and people like this going in the north to the military bases, it made them, all of them, discover that these people were not considered to be Canadian at all. I mean, the government was doing nothing for them. And they had no family allowance, they had no special pension, they had no school, they had no, there were a lot of things that they had not as compared to us. So since we think that all what we have is very good, we started to believe that they should have all of this. So this is what I call the human preoccupation. For instance, if you take a place like Fort Chimo in Quebec, well, this was a military airstrip, an airstrip built to serve for those planes going to Europe at the time of the war. Well, when this was built at 5 miles from a little Eskimo village that was there. What happened? When this big base was constructed, money was no question, of course, the Eskimos grouped around the base. And they had about 700 dogs, and the dogs fed themselves, and sometimes the people themselves also, fed themselves on the garbage of the base. And there were a lot of good steaks and all sort of things being thrown away. In the north, it has been wastage all over the place. Everybody who has been there knows that. And so the Eskimos looked around themselves to get few jobs, to pass the broom in the units of the base. And the same thing happened in Great Whale, the same thing happened in Tuktoyaktuk and many other places. So all the people grouping suddenly around the base, it happened that those who were going there, the visitors, those working there, these were very big camps, and they discovered that these people really were not treated as the other Canadians. So of course, in our papers and in the political circles, but in the 5 days in the papers, the big scandal that the journalist accused the government of in Canada was the fact that the Eskimos were not being taken care of by anybody. So the human preoccupation period started, I think. And what is interesting, I believe, is to see
point positif.
Ouais, ouais.
that we have this new thing that I raised, the environment concern, more and more present in our own society, could maybe give us some hopes. Because according to all the researchers, the social and cultural identity of these people is embedded or is one with their relation to the land. Their culture has been built on their relation to the land. It is specified to a great measure. Their culture is still specified by their relation to the land. Well, the relation to the land, we often think that it is only represented by harvesting activities. The relation with the land is hunting and fishing and doing things like that. So since we see that there are more and more of these people, and they will not be all able to fish and hunt for the rest of their life, we conclude that this link with the land must disappear. I don't believe so. I think that because of our environment, our concerns for the environment, we should develop a feeling of importance for the northern environment, and we could very well conceive that these people who can feel the land could become through research, through education, but also through jobs and good jobs, could become the administrators and the managers of the biological stock of the environment, really, the biophysical environment in the north, which is where they are. If we do not find a way to do that, well, we will have to do it anyway, later on. We will have to find people to supervise this, to prevent the planet to disappear, so to speak, or that portion of the planet to disappear. Well, it will cost quite more for our society to do that than if we would profit by the fact that they are there and that they can really play a role in that direction.
Thanks very much, Eric.
The nature is building and rebuilding itself in ecosystems. Well, in the case of the South, of course, we have modified a lot of the ecosystems, and it is more difficult to study, to understand the internal relations between the various elements than it is in the North, though we don't know yet a damn thing about this in the North, but it should be easier to know. We know a little bit, but apparently we don't know much about the interrelation between the components of the ecosystems. But anyway, it's a virgin place. It has not been spoiled. It is easier for the environmentalists to have their cries understood, because it can be said that if you do something to the permafrost, to the soil there, for instance, well, it will not be repairable over a long period of years. Well, here, if you take off the grass because you build a road and you take off the grass along the road, you can always sow more grass after it, and you reconstitute to a certain extent the nature as it was before. But in the case of the North, these things could be impossible to do, because the moment you do certain things, passing with bulldozer and tractors in the summertime, for instance, well, your traces you live there will be there for almost forever. It cannot be cured, so to speak, because you have interfered with the permafrost, which is at the very limit of its equilibrium. And the moment you interfere with it, the moment you take off the overlay, the layer over the permafrost, well, immediately you expose it to the sun or to the heat, and then it starts to melt down. And every year it melts a little bit more. So eventually it could even become lakes where you had absolutely nothing before, because it's all ice under you. Well, what time is it? Huh? 8 heures, quoi?
3 minutes to 8.
5 minutes.
5 minutes to 8, so we have still time? Studied the northern people, and this idea was developed on the occasion of a cross-cultural education conference held in Montreal in 1969. And Valley said that the traders really did not affect the culture of the Eskimos very much, almost nothing. The missionaries, not that terribly either. But of course, when the government came, then, you know, it means our society going there. And if our society goes there, our society wants these people to share our standards, our way of living, our ideals, our aspiration, our kind of preoccupation. I told you that the journalist, for instance, drew the attention of the Canadian public on the fact that the Eskimos were the most abandoned Canadians, for instance. Well, for them, they were abandoned because they had no running water, they had no sewages, they had no radio, they had no television set, they had nothing we had, you know. So, of course, this is quite natural. If you have certain things that you like to have, you want the others to to share it. Well, this changed with this coming, because suddenly the Eskimos realized that they could be important, and they could be important themselves. They could have their own preoccupation and not just be oriented after the preoccupation or modeled after the preoccupation of the dominant society. First, they were told that the land was theirs. So, if this is true, this is very important. If the people want to get the resources, well, they have to ask us, and they have, we will not necessarily say yes. So this was the first thing. Now, is there any basis for that? Of course, there is basis. In 1670, maybe you do not like dates. You don't take them. You don't like. In 1670, the King of England. Who was the King of England in 1670?
Charles.
Eh?
King Charles.
Charles what? The second? Well, so King Charles, I really know myself. I believe you. So Charles gave the Rupert land to the company of the adventurers. But in fact, later on it became, in 1823, I think it became the Hudson's Bay Company. So now, you know the Hudson's Bay Company, and now it is the Bay, Hudson's Bay Company. So the King of England gave the Rupert's land to the Hudson's Bay Company, to what was to become the Hudson's Bay Company. In fact, it was the great adventurers. Huh? What? Oh, no, this was completely British. It was the company of... No, not the Northwest. Eh? What?
Gentlemen adventurers?
There must be a noble somewhere. Eh? Noble, the company of adventurers, I think it was. And the Northwest Company...
Adventurers.
Eh?
It was gentlemen adventurers.
Yeah, gentlemen adventurers. Good, very good. Gentlemen adventurers. Now, the Northwest Company was established in Montreal here by Montreal people at in the beginning of the 19th century, in 1810 or 1805, something like that. And the two grouped together. The Hudson's Bay, the adventurers bought its rival, its competitor, and it became the Hudson's Bay Company around 1823 or something like that. So anyway, for all practical purposes, the Rupert's land, which is all that land of which the waters run into the Hudson's Bay. Okay? All the land of which the water runs into the Hudson's Bay. And there has never been a legal definition of the Rupert's land, because it seems it comprises quite more than that. It seems that from the Rupert's land were not excluded the islands, for instance. But anyway, legally speaking, at least the constitutionalists agree on one thing. All the lands of which the waters ran into the Hudson's Bay were comprised in the Rupert's land. So this is really the place where all the Eskimos live, the Rupert's land. So this Rupert's land was given, and the Hudson's Bay formed a real government on this. Now, this was in 1670, and in 1868, the Hudson's Bay Company sold it to the King of England. Well, to England, really, not to the King, but to the government of England, to England. And then England sold it to Canada in 1969, and Canada transferred various parts of that land to Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec in 1912 Extension Boundary Act. Huh? Well, of course. Excuse me. See, you are attentive students. Okay. So really what has happened is that the Rupert's Land at one point was given by the King of England to the Hudson's Bay. The Hudson's Bay sold it back to England. England sold it to Canada, and Canada transferred part of that land to 3 provinces and reserved for itself the rest of the territory, which is the Northwest Territories. Okay? Now, in this act of transfer from the King of England to the Hudson's Bay and all the others, there's always one clause in this, the same one, or about the same one, saying that the rights and privileges of the Aboriginal people must be respected. You know? It is on this act, on this clause, that are based what we call the Aboriginal rights. And this is what the people are advocating in order to be able to say that they are the owners of the land. So the Aboriginal rights means the right that those who are there since the origin of that land have. Now, these rights were not described or were not specified in this act and during all these transfers. It was just said that these rights had to be respected, and in the case of Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec, when it was transferred, these parts were transferred, this clause became the following one: Quebec, and it was the same with Ontario and Manitoba, Quebec cannot do any colonization in that part of the land without first having the rights of the Aboriginal people surrendered to the Crown through negotiation, through an agreement negotiated with the Aboriginal people, and finally approved by the federal government. No? So it means that the government of Quebec has first to have the rights of the people surrendered to it before it can do any colonizing work. Now, colonization at that time, of course, would correspond to what it would comprise the industrial development, if you want. The colonization at that time meant, of course, the main reason to get new lands in the prairies and everything was to colonize, as you know. So the term colonization is used, but of course everybody agrees that it means anything that would really have as an objective to take the resources there. This is colonization. Yeah? Hmm? Well, that's it. This is it. So, eh? Well, the federal government the Quebec government has faulted completely. I mean, it is why it has been condemned in court and the work has stopped, but we are coming to that now, okay? So, after 1912, the government of Ontario bought the rights from the Indians in the north. So the Indians surrendered their rights. The Quebec government did not do anything. And I remember well when I was there and I was interested that the James Bay would be open, that I communicated with the office of the Prime Minister about this Extension Act, and especially also because a mine was to open here, and I wanted to know what I should do, because I did not want to recommend that we would give a permit if the rights had to be first surrendered. And well, I was told that it was not my business, and I said that it was my business. And but then the company decided to slow down its work, and it is now operating, but it has started again in 1972. This is the Asbestos Corporation, which has a mine there. And then the government changed, and I explained that to Daniel Johnson, and he created the Dorion Commission in order to look into these matters. And the Dorion Commission has made its reports has presented its 6-volume report from 1969 to 1971 to the government, and it has been sort of hidden on the shelves or under the shelves, but it says exactly also that they have the rights, and the government has to have these rights surrendered first. So the government decided to ignore that, the Bourassa government, and it was, well, is it interesting for you that we talk about this? Eh? Well, okay, then we'll talk about it. It is funny because in June of 1971, I was directing a research program at the Arctic Institute of North America called Man in the North. And this was a research on community development in the North. And suddenly I received a visit of Peter Awashish, who is the assistant of the Indian chief at Mistassini. And he comes to see me because he wants to get some money. He wants to get some money to have a meeting, to organize a meeting of the chiefs in the James Bay area, the 6 communities there. So he says, we want to have a meeting between ourselves in order to decide, because at that time Bourassa has announced that he will present his project on James Bay. You see, it is not presented yet. It will be presented on the 25th of June of 1971. So, and this is the 10th of June that they come to see me. So he says they would like to discuss among themselves, the chiefs from the various places here, Rupert House, Fort George, Great Whale, Mistassini, East Main, and Paint Hills. And they want to discuss together, to take a position, and then go to the meeting of the Quebec Association of Indians that is supposed to be held on the 23rd of June in Quebec City. So he says it is urgent, because, and we have asked our tutor, he doesn't say tutor, but I know he's their tutor. He has asked the Minister of Indian Affairs to provide them with the money in order to organize that meeting. And he has refused. So I asked them, have you asked the Secretary of State? Yes, and they will consider it, but we will have an answer only in 2 months. And we want to have it immediately. So I look at their figure, and they need $2,500, and half of this is for transportation. So I say I will give you $1,250 out of my program to organize your meeting. The only condition will be that I will send 2 people in order to check certain things that we have research in the Northwest Territories, and these were in some experimental work we had done in education and with Native people in the Northwest Territories, and some study we had made about communication and the impact of ANIC satellite on the Native people. So they say, yes, we will have our meeting for 3 days. The first day will be for your people. So I give them the money. But just before they go, I say, I don't think the bill will pass because it makes no sense. But if it passes, and I give them a little paper and I say, just go to the first village you meet. Ask the first lawyer you meet to go to the court and ask for interlocutory injunction, temporary injunction. I think the legal term is interlocutory. And I give them I put Extension Boundary Act 1912, and I give the chapter of the code and everything. And he goes. Because I am sure, I've checked that with some judges at the Supreme Court, the Appeal Court, and the Superior Court. If they ask an injunction before anything is done, as soon as the law is passed, it is sure that it will be stopped. It's obvious. I mean, the law says it. It's so simple. So it will be stopped immediately. But if they wait too long, of course, and after 400, 500 million or 1 billion has been spent, of course it could become more difficult. So he goes, and they organize their meeting, but they are not alone at their meeting. The people from the Indian Association of Quebec go up north and participate in the meeting. And from now on, the fight is engaged. But one of the main fights, they don't go to the court. They try to negotiate. And they try to negotiate because the Indians of the Indian Association of Quebec does not want that the only case of James Bay be discussed. They want to solve all the Indian problems all through the province. And so they want to profit by this situation to have the government agree to solve all their problems all over the province. So the Indian Association doesn't want to go to the court. The lawyer does not want to go to the court. The lawyer at that time is at the same firm as the lawyer who has prepared the bill 50 for James Bay. Oh yeah, it's the same firm. Well, I told that in the open one day, and I was asked if I would repeat that in public. I said, of course, I say it everywhere. I will repeat it. And so the people, they were supposed to send journalists and everything. There were people who were friends with that lawyer, who seems to be a very good lawyer. But anyway, he separated from that firm. He started on his own after that. But it is just to show you that really he believed that it was possible to negotiate, and it was even more possible if he was friend with the people in power. But of course, after that he separated, and he is no more a friend of the power. He is really all in for the Indians and the Eskimo. So in Ottawa, Chrétien was saying, oh no, don't go to the court. Don't do what Gourdeau says to do. No, this is no good. Negotiate. So with all that, of course, 1.5 years passed. The James Bay spent 300 million at that time, James Bay project. And then the people went to the court. Okay. Now, an interlocutory injunction, or how do you say that? Have you got another word?
Interlocutory.
Well, okay, it is the way he says it. Let's call it X. Eh? So, it cannot last for long. I mean, it's not a permanent injunction. It's just before you will plead the permanent one. How long did it last with the Indian? 1 year. This is the first time probably all over the world. I mean, it does not exist anywhere that a case like this for a permanent injunction. Okay, but just for an interlocutory injunction, 1 year. What happened? Well, the federal government supplied all the funds, $1 million they supplied finally to have all the experts coming from British Columbia, all over the places to speak about the environment and everything. And of course, the lawyers of Hydro-Quebec and the Energy Society of James Bay and Development Society and the government, they spent probably 4 times that amount of money with an equal number of experts and all this. And everybody was interested that it would last as long as possible. Eh? So it lasted, in the court, it lasted 8 months until June. It started in 1972, in November, and it lasted until June of 1973. And then the judge took all the testimonies. He studied that for 4 months. And in November, the 5th of November 1973, he came out with his decision to grant the injunction. And so James Bay was stopped completely for 5 days. Because then the appeal court decided to suspend the effects of the judgment. Does not contradict the judgment of Malouf, Judge Malouf. Just suspend its effects. And of course, the government knew, I suppose he must have known that the Supreme Court, to which the native people went in order to have the effects re-established, and James Bay stopped again, probably the government knew that the Supreme Court cannot do that. They cannot even hear the case. People went to them and they said, we cannot hear that case, because it is within their rules, within their bylaws at the Supreme Court, not to contradict a suspension of effects that a superior court, the appeal court, applies to a judgment of an inferior court. So they could not. They didn't hear the case. It's as simple. And James Bay has continued. But of course, since Hydro-Quebec and James Bay Development Corporation had lost their case, I mean, the judgment of Judge Malouf is still there, they had to go back to the court in order to have the decision of Malouf, the judgment of Malouf, destroyed, infirmed. So, in June of 1974, finally, the appeal court heard the two parties. And we have not the judgment of the appeal court yet. So, what will happen could be that the judgment will come tomorrow, maintaining the judgment of Malouf, so stopping James Bay again. But during all that time, the tunnels are being built, the dam is being started, the diversion of waters, and all these things. So it becomes very difficult for the court to stop it. At the same time, there are some negotiations between the government and the Indians in order to solve the case and put it out of the court as soon as possible. And it seems that the government will succeed. And one of the reasons is that last summer, the Quebec Association of Indians were taken out of the case by the Cree Indian of James Bay and the Eskimos. They said, this is our case, and we want to discuss about it. And you will discuss your own case later on with the authorities. But this is a case on the Rupert's land, and we are those who are there, so we want to discuss it with the government. The government has offered first $100 million, about 5 months ago, 6 months ago, and full recognition of full ownership over 2,000 square miles of territory. Which was kind of insulting for the people, I believe, because they had always said that they were not interested in the money, but they were interested in the land. So suddenly you have a prime minister who says, we offer you $100 million, which is a very striking figure, not meaning very much really for these people. They don't know exactly what it means anyway, but for the society here, it is quite a huge amount of money. But the 2,000 square miles are very little, really, as compared to the 275,000 square miles of that part of Rupert's Land on which they could have rights and privileges. Are you fed up with that thing about the Indians? No? Yeah? They would choose it. The Indian would choose it. You say in what area these 2,000 square miles? Well, probably they would choose it. Okay? Like it happened in Alaska for the same thing. Yeah?
Would it keep 2,000 square miles together?
Well, if they want so, yes. But of course they could not choose the place where the governments want to make its power plants. But this is only 4,000 square miles. But that will be flooded. 4,000 square miles.
Did they choose?
Well, I don't know really. I'm not part of the negotiations. And they will not ask me neither, I'm sure, because I had told Bourassa before he started, I had told all the parties there, all the political, I had told Hydro-Quebec, their legal advisor, everybody, that as soon as they would want to go to the court, they would stop everything. And, well, they decided to go just the same. But in Alaska, there has been a settlement, you know. In Alaska, you had a pipeline. You had a discovery, I mentioned to you, at Eureka in 1969. You had a big discovery of oil and gas. So the companies wanted to exploit that. So they decided that they would build a pipeline coming from Prudhoe Bay to Valdez in the south here, and then put their oil on the tankers, okay, and ship it to the west coast of the United States. At the same time, they would have to take the gas, and there are two possibilities. They can take the gas through a pipeline that would go along the Mackenzie and go to the Midwest here in the United States, and but you have heard maybe about that, Mackenzie Pipeline. This is it. It would be to take the gas that is mixed with the oil here at Prudhoe Bay. So as you take out the oil, you have to take the gas out also. So there's another possibility. They could take also the gas here with a pipeline along the same route as the oil, and then liquefy the gas and put it aboard tankers also, and ship it. Some people say that there is an advantage that the pipeline would pass along the Mackenzie because it would permit at the same time to tap the gas that is discovered, the Canadian gas that is discovered in the Delta, in the Mackenzie Delta here and on Richards Island in the Mackenzie Delta. So the Indian, Eskimos and Aleuts decided in Alaska to oppose that. They said, this is our land, and you will not take this, you will not take this is our land. And it's interesting because in the case of Alaska, in 1867, this was given by the Tsar, this was sold by the Tsar of Russia to the United States. Alaska. It was part of Russia at that time. And it was sold. And again in that, in the act of sale of Alaska, it was sold for 100 million. It was said in the act that the rights and privileges of the Aboriginal people had to be respected. And this is the only legal point they had also. So what happened finally? It happened that the Alaska Aleuts, Eskimos, and Indians, by an act passed in the Congress in 1971, in December of 1971, got 40 million acres of land and $1 billion. It's not completely true, it's $962.7 million. So, this is a precedent. These 40 million acres, you have 640 acres. These 40 million acres of Alaska. And the Eskimos, Indians, and Aleuts have created 12 regional organize things in such a manner that they could not fall. This could be a very bad tendency we would have also. And if we do like that, I mean, we will continue indefinitely to keep them incapable of solving their own affairs.
Besides the part is very long, we seem to have quite enough problems of our own to solve first.
Who?
Right? We all of us on this continent have enough problems here with that to attend to before we...
Yeah, sure. No, you're right. And it's quite obvious that very often we establish in the north what I call little Napoleons who are in charge of everything in their village, but we would not give them a similar responsibility in the south. They would not be capable. They have not the judgment, they have not the knowledge, but the moment they are in the north, they act as if they would have all the skills and all the judgment necessary to decide at the place of the people what should be done. Well, anyway, maybe it's a little long to explain all of that, but is it an answer to your question? Because I don't know what will happen, but I know that this model is there, and I know that Siak-Sia, who is the negotiator for the government of Quebec, has alluded to the Alaska settlement and has said that the Quebec offer was better than the Alaska settlement. So if it is better, I suppose that at least they would have the same sort of freedom to choose the best land, because this is something that has been accorded to the autochthonous people in Alaska. Yeah. Could be from a certain point of view. You have the beaver land there, which is a very good one. But the Eskimos would say that the best land for them is something else, because they are especially fond of seal hunting and these things. But I would say that for the Cree Indians, I would believe, yes, that they would say it's the best, East Main and around Fort George. Yeah.
This offer that would
Hmm?
divide the native people?
Would they what?
This offer
Yeah.
would divide native people within, because the Inuits say that they would like this part, and the Cree say that they would like this part, therefore.
No, but they are. Ah, well, I have not explained that. Another thing. You have the Inuit are present all over here, see? And the Indians are below that. So you have no Inuit with the Indians, and you have no Indians with the Inuit here, except at one place, Great Whale River, where you have the northernmost Indians in New Quebec. You have 250 of them, as compared to 500 Eskimo. But they don't go further than that. After that, these are the Eskimos, because this is the tundra, and the Eskimos are the people of the tundra, while the Indians are people of the forest, of the hinterland. Historically speaking, it has been divided like this.
How much will the tundra be affected?
By the project of James Bay, I don't think anybody could answer that question, because the big problem is precisely that the studies have not been made to determine that, According to the studies that have been made so far, we cannot explain in detail, but we can always say that the part of the tundra, the Chimo, Fort Chimo in the Inuit territory, will surely be affected, because you are taking the basin, the upper basin of the Kaniapisco River, which is the biggest river there, flowing into the Agava Bay. The Hydro-Québec is taking it to divert it in La Grande River here, So surely it will have an effect. But what kind of effect? The studies have not been made enough to determine that. Now, what will be the effect on the area around the East Main River and this thing? Apparently, where they are flooding, the beaver will not be affected, because the beaver is to the south. It does not go up to there. They say it will not affect the caribou, but I don't know. It could affect it, because we have not studied yet the migration route of the caribou. So, of course, if they decide to stop all work between the 15th of April and the 10th of May, when the caribou migrate, okay, maybe it will not affect them. But if they don't stop at that time, maybe it will affect them. Maybe it will take a very important toll on the caribou herds. But really, the studies are going on. But this was a big complaint that not enough studies had been made, really, to take the decision. Is it finished?
No, go ahead. I'm just standing up closer to when it is, that's all.
What?
And I wanted more of what you said.
What time is it? What time is it? Eh? So we have still time, no?
Lots of time there, Grace. Want to see,
What one?
please.
Is all this clear about this question of rights and things like that? See, what is interesting with the Maloof judgment is that Judge Maloof has studied all the treaties that have been passed. See, I have said that there were Aboriginal rights, and you see sometime that there's another sort of right. These are the treaty rights. So the treaty rights, when they apply, when the treaties have been passed that affect people living in the Rupert's land, when these treaties have been passed, of course, they have been passed in order to explicit the Aboriginal rights. So Judge Maloof has taken all the treaties that Canada has passed since the transfer of the Rupert's land with the Indians. And so he has studied Treaty 1 to Treaty 11. And he has found in many of them that after surrendering their rights to the land, the Indians and the Indians kept according to the treaty, their right, their exclusive right to hunt and fish on that land. So the judge has said, this means that the rights that are being alluded to in the act of transfer of Rupert's land are not only the rights to fish and to hunt, because in many occasions, after giving away their rights, the Indians keep these rights. So there was something else. And he says, I have all reason to believe that it means that these rights were rights to the ownership of the land itself. So he is the first one to say that. So it's why it's a very historical judgment. Of course, he had not, this is not definitive because it's only an injunction, but he had to see enough merit in the case that he could stop the thing. So he decided that there was, in all probability, because of the way Canada has treated the Indians, he could see that in all probability the rights mentioned there are rights to the land, and not only usufructuary rights as the other pretended. Usufructuary, this means that you use the fruit of the land. So you can harvest, you can use the fish, the game, but it's not a right to the land itself. Okay. So the judge has said, no, it's more than that, surely more than that. Now, I do not want to leave you under the impression that this is the only thing that the native people want at the present time. I think it's a first thing because it's the natural thing for them to want. You know, if we look back at the history, we have come to the north and we have said, your religion is no good. You have to replace it by our religion. This is for your good. Okay. They converted themselves to Christianism. We said, your language is no good. No? It's no good because we don't speak it. So you should abandon that and replace it by English. Okay, no good. We have said, your way to educate your children is no good. No? You take them and you show them all sort of things to survive in the forest and to work. This is no good. So they have to come to the school and you have just to receive pension and allowances and things like that. This is our way of doing things. You see, this is for your good. Okay, it's for our good. There is just one thing about which, one standard of ours, about which we have told them, no, this is not for you. This is good for us, but not for you. And this is the ownership of the land. When we came to that, you see, we said, oh, no, this is a bad thing. Don't take it. You see, no. You cannot be the owner of your land. You cannot become rich out of your land. We can speculate. We can do all sort of things with it, but not you. This is bad. So when they realize that, because they are becoming educated and things like that, if they are proud, and they are proud, you see, they cannot but react to that, you know. And it is surely quite insulting to be suddenly massively invaded and bulldozed to all practical purposes. At least, culturally speaking, they thought that they had something that belonged to them and nobody would take away. And this was the land on which they were walking. This was the water on which they were canoeing. This was the games that they could harvest. And now all this being suddenly challenged, all this being suddenly taken away from them, well, of course, they get back. But there is another thing, and they want also, they know that they will evolve, like any other group of human beings, and they want to have an active part in their own evolution. And of course, you've seen that. So far, the North has always been oriented according to our preoccupation. Now they have developed a certain number of preoccupation, and they will still develop preoccupation and interest for their land. And so they want to have an active part in this. They want to play an active role. So they do not only want money and recognition of their rights. They want also to be recognized as human beings, and they want to become policymakers and decision takers. And if I could conclude on this, I have to do that rapidly, but the fact that we have this new thing that I raised, the environment concern, more and more present in our own society, could maybe give us some hopes. Because according to all the researchers, the social and cultural identity of these people is embedded or is one with their relation to the land. Their culture has been built on their relation to the land. It is still specified to a great measure. Their culture is still specified by their relation to the land. Well, the relation to the land, we often think that it is only represented by harvesting activities. The relation with the land is hunting and fishing and doing things like that. So since we see that there are more and more of these people, and they will not be all able to fish and hunt for the rest of their life, we conclude that this link with the land must disappear. I don't believe so. I think that because of our environment, our concerns for the environment, we should develop a feeling of importance for the northern environment, and we could very well conceive that these people who can feel the land could become, through research, through education, but also through jobs and good jobs, could become the administrators and the managers of the biological stock of the environment, really, the biophysical environment in the north, which is where they are. If we do not find a way to do that, well, we will have to do it anyway, later on. We will have to find people to supervise this, to prevent the planet to disappear, so to speak, or that portion of the planet to disappear. Well, it will cost quite more for our society to do that than if we would profit by the fact that they are there and that they can really play a role in that direction.
Thanks very much, Eric. Yeah, I'll tell us anyway. There was a case of missionaries who went north who succeeded in converting the caribou to Christianity. And the two of them were there with the flock of caribou they had converted. And one was quite pleased. The other said, well, this is all very well, but how do we take the collection? And this question of adapting the north to the ways of the south has been one of our continuing problems, and as Eric suggests, perhaps we have to consider not simply adapting the north to the ways of the south, but give some consideration to the ways of the north too. Thank you, Eric.
Nice.